So it is my pleasure to connect everybody today with Monica Justice. She's an awesome person, a thought leader, a strategic thinker, and just an incredible resource for so many different things. So she has a way of making things that are really complicated bite size, and that's what she's going to share with us today. So thank you for investing an hour with us today, Monica.
Of course, I'm happy to. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'll share you with the world. So can you give us a little bit of your background so everybody knows kind of where you're coming from?
Yeah. So as you know, I am one of 8 kids, I'm the second to the youngest, and I grew up in an entrepreneurial household. My dad ran his own business from our house. And after putting myself through college, I went to work for a then emerging internet or electronic retailing company, QVC. Mm-hmm. And I was just fascinated with the vision of the company at that time, which was changing the way the world shops.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be a part of something that was growing, changing, and I could kind of see the potential in the future. So I joined very entry level as a fashion stylist and worked in broadcasting, which I had no business working in broadcasting, but I did it. I took the risk and I loved it, loved everything about it. Ended up being quickly promoted throughout all of broadcast and studio operations at QVC. And as the company was growing, I just took on more and more opportunity. I was able to build new functions as the business required it, scale functions and capabilities, operationally oriented stuff within the studio operations group. Yeah. And as the internet and the digital platform really expanded, took on the photo studios and then post-production. Ultimately, by 2010, I was leading all of creative operations for what was at that time now an $8 billion global organization. So I had the great privilege of being with QVC from the early days all the way to pretty significant growth. I ended up spending 20 years of my career with QVC. But I did leave in 2010. I left to go up to Allele, which was an e-commerce startup. And I think what appealed to me about that was that the entrepreneurial kind of shine was coming off of QVC a little bit for me because I had done so much and it really became this big corporate entity. And the idea of being a part of a startup, again, was really exciting to me. So moved the family up to Massachusetts and took a role leading production at Allele. And that really meant that I was working with the founders, the function leaders to help scale the production engine. So kind of the end to end of what it took to get a product sourced to live on the website. Did that for about 4 years, and then I was recruited back to QVC in 2014, but for a very different role. And I was actually leading the EOS project management office. That was what I was hired to do. And they really needed somebody who could kind of be a bridge between the technology team and the EOS commerce business team at that time. And so I came in to do that, but very quickly that role turned into a global role. And I ended up facilitating between IT, the business units globally, and worked with the executive team there to help them through prioritization and then kind of funneling that prioritization down to the business units. So everybody was working on the right stuff. Yeah. Loved that role. And in particular, just working with the executive team to facilitate that decision-making and keeping things moving along, and then driving that out into the organization from a communications perspective. Wasn't accountable for communications, but had to work really closely with the communications leaders to ensure that everybody knew what was most important and what the priorities were. Yeah. So kind of fast forward to 2018, after I had led the integration management for QVC's acquisition of HSN, I decided to leave and start my own consulting practice. So through the process of discovering what I wanted my unique position to be as a consultant, ended up doing some informal consulting and networking and came across this Entrepreneurial Operating System. And it really does just kind of pull together all the things I loved and kind of had this unique ability to do at QVC in particular, but now apply it out to small and mid-sized businesses. And that's what I'm really passionate about is, you know, at this juncture that I can support and help these smaller to mid-sized businesses, hopefully within our community, to, grow and break through the growth ceiling.
Yeah.
That's really what I'm passionate about.
That's
And
incredible. Oh
now.
my gosh, Monica. To hear your story this way, it reminds me of the Midas touch. You remember that?
Yeah.
And the song. And it's like the
Yeah.
Monica touch. When you get
Oh.
into places, that's what you do. You just make things
Yeah.
better. I mean, that's like in our friendship, you're like that. And what I'm hearing is in business, you have found a way, a tangible way to just make things better. You lean into the unknown, which I think is a
Yeah.
scary thing to do. The fact that you're attracted to entrepreneurial environments is an example of that. It's sloppy, it's unknown. And even for these larger organizations who are benefiting from your wisdom today, everybody's innovating and evolving and growing and changing. So it's, even though you may have a 100+ year old company, you're still evolving, and you could use these
Absolutely.
principles. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think that's
you see
awesome.
it in the headlines. Like, I think yesterday, NBC Universal announced that they're going to take this opportunity of this pandemic to really look at their strategies and kind of, pivot and refocus the organization. And so I think you're absolutely right. Even large organizations are kind of thinking about how do they reposition themselves to remain competitive and leverage their people and their resources in the most effective way. And it comes back to that idea of simplicity, right? And sometimes a crisis forces you to say, okay, let's clean out all the clutter and focus on what's most important. And that's really where everything that I work with leaders on is kind of helping them build almost from the ground up and really look at every facet of their business so they can operate better together as a team.
Yeah, and some of the things that you're about to share with us, Monica, to me are evergreen. Like, they were relevant long before the pandemic. They're relevant during the pandemic. They'll be relevant after they're
Absolutely.
the evergreen type of, it's always going to be good business practice to implement these things to make things less ambiguous or less stressful or less effective. And, you taught me about EOS. For those of you who have never heard that acronym before, Monica just described it as an entrepreneurial operating system. Had never heard of that before. And now I'm fascinated by this and this book Traction, which I think you'll talk about a little today. So let's jump in.
Sure. Everything that I do when I work with leadership teams, I help them implement this comprehensive business operating system. And it was created by a lifelong entrepreneur by the name of Gino Wickman, and Gino wrote the book Traction. And he ended up taking over his family business, and it was in need of a turnaround. So he worked with the leadership team to turn that business around. And then he ended up running that business for about 7 years before he sold it. And he, at that time, also became a member of the EO Detroit chapter. And EO is the Entrepreneurs Organization. It's a very well-respected peer group for entrepreneurs, founders, business owners. And when he was working with the other members of that chapter, he realized he had this real knack and passion for the art and science of what it takes to run a truly great entrepreneurial organization. So he started cobbling together EOS. And just as you said, it's a set of timeless concepts that have been around forever and will probably be around forevermore. And so now what I do as an EOS implementer, there are about 350 EOS implementers around the globe. So it's a very kind of vibrant community. But more importantly is we have facilitated full day sessions with the leadership teams of over 8,000 organizations at this point. So it's had a huge impact. And I feel like there's still so many people who don't even know about it. So it's had a huge impact. And what we do when we work with leadership teams is we help them get better at three things we call vision, traction, and healthy. And vision just means getting 100% on the same page with where you're going long term. Traction is executing on that vision with focus and discipline and accountability. And then healthy is just building a more cohesive, functional, fun-loving team. So that's kind of the essence of what I do and kind of the value proposition I offer. But when the basis of EOS came out of this discovery of what makes the successful organization successful. And you've probably heard, and especially as an entrepreneur yourself, that about 5% of all entrepreneurial ventures actually end up being successful. So that means that 95% are failing. So when you step back and you look at what is driving that, It turns out that there are 5 frustrations that all entrepreneurs face, and they are control or lack thereof it. And I love this descriptive of that an EOS client used, which is lack of control. Sometimes they feel like their business is running them, and their business is like a van that is driving 60 miles an hour down the road, and they're not in it, and they're just chasing the van, and they're grabbing onto the doors, and they're trying to get themselves back in the front seat, right? And you've probably been there at some point. You know, sometimes your business is on fire, and you just can't seem to get control over it. So it's a lack of control. The second frustration is profit, or lack thereof it. So maybe they got started, things were great, they were doing okay, but all of a sudden they've added more people or added more functions or capabilities that cost money, and now they're not as profitable as they once were.
Right.
The third frustration is around people. It just seems like no matter where they go, the people who report into them, the people that work beside them, their family, their investors, nobody gets it as well as they get it. They don't understand it, and it's frustrating. They can't seem to get people who really get what they get. The other is hitting the ceiling, and this is a concept that was popularized actually way back in the 60s, but it's this idea that you're moving along. Every business is kind of moving along, evolution, and then all of a sudden some revolution happens. There's some complexity that comes into the business. And that might be that you hired a bunch of people and now they're not performing as well as they once did. Or you lost a part of your business and now you need to rebuild a new division or something along those lines.
Sure.
The great leaders, the great companies find a way to break through that ceiling every time. And it really requires a set of leadership capabilities to help them break through that ceiling. And then the fifth frustration that all leaders face is kind of nothing works, right? We call it nothing works. And you know it, and so many people you've probably coached have felt like, okay, I read every book, I go to seminars, and then I come back into my business and I share it with my team, and they go, flavor of the month, and that next month is going to be something else. So it's a frustration that they just can't seem to find something that works. So those are kind of the foundation, those are the frustrations. So when Gino started creating EOS and cobbling this together, what he discovered is that the 5% of companies that were really successful were strong in 6 key areas of their business. And that's what we call EOS. That's the EOS model. And I'll just run through that with you now. I'm going to open up my slide here. And I'm just going to walk through, and I'll pause for a second. Shannon, do you have any questions?
No, I think this is great.
Okay.
Jump right in.
Okay, excellent. All right. So this is the EOS model. I'm just going to kind of run through it first at a high level, and then I'm going to get into a couple of the tools or disciplines that I teach clients to help them strengthen each of the 6 key components. So it always starts with your business at the center. And the first key component is what we call vision. And that's just getting everybody 100% on the same page with where you're going long term. And the important thing about vision is just that you do that at a leadership team level, but also deep into the organization, as deep as your organization is. But getting that clarity on where the organization is going long term. The second key component is people. So when we talk about people, obviously you can't achieve a great vision without great people, but every organization defines great people differently. So when we talk about great people, it's about identifying the right people for your organization, the people who are the right fit for your organization, that are fit with your culture.
Right.
And then the third key component is data. And this is about running your business on facts and figures and objective information rather than the egos, feelings, and subjective information that often are the ways that you measure and evaluate a business as an entrepreneurial organization, but really any organization, okay?
Yeah.
So it's really about facts, figures, and objective information. What happens is as the vision, people, and data components get strong, all of the impurities, imperfections, and problems just sort of jump out at you. And that's the fourth key component, which is issues. So the issues component is just about identifying your problems as they arise and then making them go away forever. And, my belief is that you can't achieve a great vision if you're not great at setting your problems up, setting your issues up as they arise, and then knocking them down and making them go away forever. So it's a really important key component. And I'm going to share the tool we use to knock your issues down and make them go away forever.
Yes.
And then the fifth key component is process. And this is about identifying the handful of core processes in your organization that truly make your business run. And from when you identify what those core processes are, you then need to document them at a high level. And what this does is it creates consistency, predictability, scalability, and at the end of the day, it ends up making your business more fun, right? So that's the process component. And then traction is the sixth key component. And traction is just bringing your vision down to the ground and executing on it really well. And Gino says that vision without traction is hallucination. And I love that, right? Because you have this great vision, but if you can't bring it down to the ground and get everybody executing on that vision, then you're really not going to go anywhere. You're going to be spinning your wheels.
Yes.
So that's this idea of traction.
We can relate to that.
So those are the six key components. And, when we talk about the six key components in the EOS model, we actually use a scientific but subjective scale to measure your performance along the journey, because it really is a journey then to strengthen each of the key components. Our goal obviously is to get to 100% strong in each of the key components, knowing that that is, utopia. It's probably not going to happen. So our focus is really about getting to 80% strong or better in each of the six key components. So the reality, though, is that most organizations are at 20% strong, and they're succeeding in spite of themselves. So that's really the focus. And the way that we get to 100% strong is through facilitation of these tools and teaching of these tools. So I'm going to go through them. I'm just going to go through a few of them for everybody today. I'm going to go through the vision tools, the issues tools, and then the traction tools. I would love to go through everything, just don't have enough time. But the first tool or discipline we use for the vision component is something we call 8 questions. And I'm going to stop sharing now just because I think it's easier for me to just kind of show this to you. But the 8 questions, first I'll just tell you what they are. So the 8 questions are: what are your core values? What is your core focus? What is your 10-year target? What's your marketing strategy? What are your, what is your 3-year picture? What does your 3-year picture look like? What are your quarterly rocks, and what are your issues? What's your issues list? Okay. So with those 8 questions in mind, we actually use a pretty nifty thing. This is the first tool, and this is going to be available. I gave this to you as a link. This is what we call the Vision Traction Organizer. Yeah. And in the Vision Traction Organizer, it's nicely laid out, right? Like you've got a vision side, vision side, and a traction side. You've got it there too.
Yeah.
And all of those 8 key components are laid out on the Vision Traction Organizer. And then I just kind of walk through them one by one. So when I'm working with the leadership team, we literally go through them and we define them for their organization. And I like to say that we actually discover them, because usually they're there, they just haven't really articulated them, right?
Yes.
So the first question is, what are your core values? And Shannon, you know what core values are, clearly. And we both have our vibe book. So we talked, the first V in vibe is values. And, we work to identify them for ourselves, hopefully, right? We know what we value as individuals. And this is a very similar process. It's identifying what we value as an organization. It defines who you are and what you want from the culture of your organization. And when you step back and discover the core values of your organization, you do everything around those core values. You hire people against your core values, so you attract the right people who are fit with your culture, and you detract, you repel the people who are not a fit to your culture. So it's really powerful. And unfortunately, I think it was popularized in the probably mid to late 90s. And a lot of people went off and started creating core values, which is great, but some of them it became trite. And in some cases, people took somebody else's core values, put them up on a wall and said, good, we got it.
Mm-hmm.
We really step back, and a few of the clients I work with actually have core values coming in. And when we go through the exercise of discovering their core values, maybe one or maybe two stay, but often they find that who they are is really different than what they've already put up on a wall. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Makes perfect sense.
So that's core values. And then core focus is the sweet spot in your organization.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been called, a million things. Some people call it a vision statement. Some people call it a mission statement. Stephen Covey called it voice.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Collins called it the hedgehog concept. And we just call it the core focus because when it's clearly articulated, the key is staying laser focused within your core focus so that you're always executing in your sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
The sweet spot, we know sweet spot on a tennis racket and a golf club. It's that same concept that when you hit it in that sweet spot, it goes a lot further. Yeah. So that's really this idea of the core focus. It reduces the temptation or keeps you disciplined from chasing those shiny objects.
Yeah.
So that's your core focus. And then your 10-year target is a long-term big goal for your organization. And it might be that the timeline is flexible. It could be anywhere from 5 to 30 years. So, we're not too prescriptive on that. We just find that 10 years is kind of a good number for most people. But what it is a long-term, number one big goal for the organization. When it's clearly articulated, everybody can see where the organization is going long-term. Mm-hmm. And then the marketing strategy is, I'm going to kind of bring this one up again so we can kind of zoom into it. Mm-hmm. Second. So the marketing strategy is broken up into 4 things. Your target market. And what the marketing strategy is about getting your organization, your leadership team in particular, 100% aligned on where you should be investing your precious sales and marketing energy, okay? Mm-hmm. So we first identify the target market. Who are the customers that you should be going after, that you should be laser focused on marketing and selling to? Mm-hmm. So we step back and we take a look at the demographic, geographic, and the psychographic makeup of the core customers that you aim to serve, and make sure that there's alignment at the leadership team level about who that customer is. And then we define your 3 uniques. What are the 3 differentiators, the 3 things that differentiate you from your competition, that really set you apart in the eyes of your customer? Yeah. And then your proven process is just a 1-page illustration of who you are, of how you take care of your customers from the minute they think about doing business with you all the way to the time they are long-term loyal customers. Mm-hmm. And this is just an example of the proven process I use as an EOS implementer. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but you can see, practice what I preach. Yeah. So having a 1-page illustration that your customers can kind of see and respond to is really valuable. Mm-hmm. And it gets everybody in your organization clear on that as well. Yep. And then the last thing in the marketing strategy is a guarantee. So you just decide whether or not you have a guarantee, but what it is a pledge or a promise that reduces the fear of adoption. It removes any barriers that customers might have about doing business with you. So not every organization has a guarantee, but if you do have it, it can be a really powerful way to reduce that fear of adoption from your customers. Yeah. So that's the marketing strategy. And what happens is when you have a clear sense of what your values are, you know who you are at the core, you know what you can be best at with your core focus, you know where you're going long term with your 10-year target, and you know how you're going to get there with your marketing strategy. Once you're clear on all of that, now you can take that vision down and start to make it real with your 3-year picture. Mm-hmm. And what I love about the 3-year picture is it is a simplified approach to strategic planning. Yeah. You and I have both been in 3 to 5 year strategic planning sessions, right? Yeah. They can last days.
Yeah. Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So this is a simplified approach to that. So once you're clear on where you're going long term, what we do is we step back and this is the first time we start to make nearer term predictions about the business. We say, okay, if we know where we want to be in 10 years, what do our revenue, profit, and measurables need to look like in 3 years to set the foundation for achieving that 10-year target? And then we just step back and we paint a picture, literally, almost literally, about what that's going to look like. So the things we put on here would be things like, we've doubled our staff, or we moved to a new office space, or we have some new technology to enable and create new capabilities in our organization. So it's really kind of starting to create this vision of what your organization looks and feels like in 3 short years from now to lay the foundation for that 10-year target. And we actually do an exercise after we complete it where we close our eyes, I read it out. Well, they close their eyes, I read it out. And it's just really powerful because now you can start to see what this is going to look like. And when everybody can start to see the same thing in their mind's eye, amazing things happen, right? We know that when we can see it, it's more likely that we're going to be able to achieve it.
Yeah.
The other thing it does is it sets you up for really solid 1-year planning. And that's the next part of this. The other side of the Vision Traction Organizer is where we get into your 1-year plan. So now you can look at where you want to be 3 years from now, where you need to be 3 years from now. And you start to you make the same predictions for 1 year out. So this year or next, depending on where you are in your cycle, and you predict revenue, profit, and measurables for the year. And then you set 3 to 7 goals or priorities for the year. And we specifically say 3 to 7 because when everything's important, nothing is important. So, we like to say less is more. So it requires discipline, right? So now you can start to see where this idea of discipline is saying, okay, you can't have 10 things on the list. You can't have 20 things on the list. What are the most important things that we need to do as a team this year to advance our vision? And then from there, we move on to rocks. And rocks are the quarterly priorities. And it's really based on this observation that as humans, it's just human nature that we come out of great 1-year planning, and after 90 days, we lose focus. So the idea of rocks is just kind of creating this 90-day world in your organization where you stop and look back on the previous quarter and then set the priorities for the next quarter. So breaking your 1-year plan into quarterly rocks so that you're always prioritizing and you know what is important in the quarter. So we, again, set revenue, profit, and measurable targets. So those are kind of the quantifiable numbers. And then we set rocks for the company, and the leadership team each sets rocks. And when I was at QVC, we implemented OKRs, that's objectives and key results. It's similar, but they're different methodologies, but it's the same idea that you're setting quarterly objectives to achieve your 1-year target and your vision. It creates focus, discipline, and it drives accountability. You create it at the company level, the leadership team level, and eventually it drives down into the entire organization where everybody has 2 or 3 rocks that they're accountable for.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And then the last question on the Vision Traction Organizer is issues list. And I mentioned issues earlier, and basically just, every organization's got, at least 6 issues that emerge every single day. We just want to get them out of your head and onto paper. There is therapy in doing that. So as I mentioned earlier, it's hard to prioritize and get that list of 1-year goals down to 3 to 7, especially for a lot of organizations. So we can think of the issues list almost like a parking lot sometimes, like this thing that I really wanted to put on my 1-year plan. I'm going to put it over here on the issues list so that we don't lose sight of it. It may become a quarterly rock. It may become, go into our 1-year plan next year. Often though, that thing you thought was so important gets solved with something else. So what I find a lot of times is clients end up just erasing things on their issues list because they solved it in some other way. So it's a good way to kind of get your challenges, problems, things that didn't get prioritized onto a list somewhere so that you can action them. So that's the Vision Traction Organizer. And it's a really powerful tool. I always say that even if somebody doesn't use an implementer to implement EOS, I really find that this is a valuable tool. And I gave you a few different versions of this, Shannon. One is for business, for your company. There's also a version for family. And then there's a personal version, which my husband Kevin uses, which is awesome. So, you can really think about how you can adapt it to all different facets of your life.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's a vision traction
And will
organizer.
you
And
will you
then,
get into
yeah,
the level 10 meeting at all today,
I
Monica?
will. Yes.
Okay, good.
I'll get into that in a minute. How are we doing on time? We're okay.
We're doing
Yeah,
great.
I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
So the second discipline we teach is just shared by all. And this is very simple. Once you've answered the 8 questions, you just got to share all this information with your company. So you have to have a state of the company meeting. You got to share your values, make sure everybody shares them with you. You got to share your core focus. So it seems obvious, but we don't want to not say it because it's a really important step. Is once you as a leadership team, you have answered the 8 questions, share it with the rest of your organization because everybody needs to see the same thing in their mind's eye. And it is absolutely true that people need to hear things 7 times before they hear it the first time. So just, if you've said it, 3 or 4 times, just know that it's only going to be 3 or 4 more times before they actually really get it. So it's an important part of the process. And I think a lot of people kind of overlook it. So that's 100% strong on the vision component. I can't get into 100% strong on the people or data components yet today, but happy to follow up on that stuff as well later. The one I do want to kind of get into, because I think it sets some good context for the level 10 meeting, Shannon, is the issue solving track. So the 2 tools or disciplines we teach for issues, and we actually, as EOS implementers, many of us facilitated IDS sessions with teams who were just trying to figure things out during the pandemic. It's a really powerful tool to kind of get you re-engaged and grounded as a leadership team.
Yeah, just tell us what IDS stands for.
Sure. Yeah. So
here we go.
2 tools we use. Yeah, that's okay. So issues list is what I talked about in the Vision Traction Organizer, and IDS stands for Identify, Discuss, and Solve. It's what we also call the issue solving track. And it works like this. So you have your issues, like over here on the right, and it comes from this discovery that even great leadership teams, here's identify, discuss, and solve. Great leadership teams get in a room to solve an issue, to tackle an issue. And what happens is they discuss the heck out of it. They continue to discuss it, and discuss it.
Nobody can relate to this, Monica.
No, I know, right? I didn't live through this at all. So we love to discuss the issue. We break it apart. We discuss it till it becomes 10 different issues, right? And what happens is they never truly identify anything at the core, right? They don't know what it is. By the time they leave, they're not even sure what issue they were trying to solve oftentimes. And they never really solve it. And the issue we know is going to come up the next day, the next week, maybe the next year. So we just take a different approach to issue solving. And the other thing I think is important too is this idea of this issues list. It ends up creating a cultural change in an organization. When the leadership team gets really good at what I'm going to show you here in a minute, you get to a point where everybody in the organization feels comfortable raising their hand to get an issue on a list somewhere in the organization. And maybe even better than I do, Shannon, that is fear keeps people from doing that, right? If you haven't created a safe environment and you haven't taught people how to effectively prioritize and solve issues together, things go unsaid. And then you get tension and people leave the meeting and have the meeting after the meeting, right? Why didn't we talk about that issue that was on slide 2? Because that's been on there and that number's been off for weeks and weeks, right? We know that happens. So this issue solving track is really meant to drive a culture in the organization where, one, it's okay to get an issue raised. And in fact, you need to get your issues on a list somewhere. And now we work together to prioritize them and teach you how to solve them. So the way we work is you have your issues, and what you want to do is prioritize them first as a leadership team. So you're going to identify the 1, 2, and 3 most important issues that need to be addressed this week. And you do this as part of this level 10 meeting, which we'll talk about in a minute. Identify the top 3 issues you need to address, and then you identify it first at the root. So usually what's written on the list isn't really describing what's actually going on. So the person who put it on the issues list just needs to kind of talk about it and say, well, here's the issue that we're having. Our productivity is down and I can't seem to get people to improve their productivity. Well, what is the real issue? Is it a training issue? Is it, so they get at the root of what the issue is, and then they move on to discuss it. And as a leadership team, everybody says something. It's supportive, it's respectful, and it's helpful, right? So everybody has an opportunity to discuss the issue. But what we say is you don't repeat yourself. And this is what happens a lot in leadership team meetings. People think they're not being heard, so they say it 2 and 3 and 4 times, and then it just becomes politicking, right? So you're creating this culture around the table, which is, I hear your issue, here's my point of view on it. Everybody shares their point of view, and then you move into solving that issue. You solve it. It usually means that somebody has an action coming out of that discussion, and then it goes away, and you move on to the next issue. And you just keep moving through that until all of those issues are solved. Great leadership teams start with 3, they get to 6 issues. Sometimes they can work up to 12 issues in a meeting. It really just depends on the dynamic, but a really powerful tool. And that's how you get to 100% strong in the issues component.
And Monica, is there some kind of an agreement going into this that when it's solved, it's solved? Like it doesn't go back to discussion mode, or is it flexible where it's like, you know, we might get more data and decide that that issue is still an issue? Like what happens when something's not actually solved?
Yeah, when it's solved, it's solved. And that, you know, the idea is we want to move it off of the list. And sometimes you leave the meeting with an action. Maybe you have a to-do as a leader, and you come back and you realize that there's something else. You know, there's some other thing that emerged that you couldn't actually solve that issue. You put it back on the list, and you work together to solve it again. To solve it in a different way, because now you understand the issue differently. So it's unlikely that the issue would repeat itself exactly as is. And the nice part of this is it constantly iterates, it evolves. So you can imagine that certainly, and I've had that experience as well, that it's an issue, you get at the heart of what the issue, what needs to be solved this week. And something else may emerge next week related to it, but it's not going to be exactly the same thing. That's how you really feel like you're moving forward. You're getting traction, right? You're starting to solve things together as a leadership team, and it might not be 100% yet, but you're moving it forward. And I think you talked about this yesterday. It's about taking action, right? You solve it as best you can, you take action, and you move it forward to continuously improve.
Yeah, that's great.
So the next key component is process. And again, I won't get into these tools. It's about documenting your processes and getting them followed by all. I will say, though, that this is about taking a very simplified approach to documenting processes. And it's really important because it does help you get more consistency. Think about franchises, right? If you go into any franchise, think of any franchise, they have their way of doing something. And this sort of becomes, you know, the bridge between way of doing things. So you want to get it documented, but it's not about creating big process manuals. And I bring this up because I am guilty of creating long process manuals in my career. They probably still sit on the desk to people at QVC and Rulella somewhere. People just don't read them, right? So it's about documenting it at a high level. Document 20% of the steps so that you can get to 80% compliance. And that's counterintuitive to some people. And for some people, even that is overwhelming, but it's an important step. So that's the how you get to 100%.
I mean, I think that we've seen an example of that in this pandemic, right? Because what we were told repeatedly is wash your hands, don't touch your face, wear a mask, right? So that process has been easy to implement in a way because it's simple. It's not like here's the 15,000 things and then 45-page document, right? So I think that we know what it feels like when something hits the ground with clarity. This traction thing is so important. Oh, I'm so glad you're covering this.
All right. So I'll talk about how we get 100% strong in the traction component. So the first is rocks. So I told you about rocks when we talked about this vision traction organizer and this idea of 90-day priorities. And rocks is, and just so everybody knows, it comes from Stephen Covey when he did this great illustration of, you know, this idea of a glass cylinder, and you have to put the rocks in the cylinder first and then the pebbles and the sand and the water, otherwise the rocks won't fit, right? So that's where this comes from. But the two tools we teach are rocks and meetings, or meeting pulse. And first I'll cover rocks, just a little different context. So you have the priorities for the quarter, but it kind of works like this, is you have your, think about it as your kind of longer term meeting pulse. So organizations, what we recommend is that leadership teams get together annually for about 2 days to really look at their vision and make sure it's all right, set their 1-year plan and their first set of quarterly rocks. And then from there, they do a quarterly meeting, and ideally off-site, where they look back on the quarter, see how they did, and then set the rocks for the next quarter, come out of that meeting and do their all-company meeting. And I will say Mike George was amazing at this. Every quarter, he came out to this global organization and did a state of the company address.
Yeah.
And it's just about getting everybody clear, like, okay, yes, our vision is still our vision, and I know that this is what's most important this quarter. So that's this idea of rocks. It creates this 90-day world for your organization.
Mm-hmm.
The second then is meeting pulse. And what I mean by that is you've got your annual, your quarterly. Now as a leadership team, you need to be meeting every week at the same time, in the same way. You've got to have that predictability, and it starts to create discipline. And I'm telling you that almost every leadership team fights this initially, but once they experience it after several times, they fight for it because it provides so much value to their organization.
Yeah, talk about a parking lot. It's like, it's coming. So it's like, that's the place where you can share the thing that's on your mind. Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing that gets people is 90 minutes. This is a 90-minute meeting, and it is every week, the same day, same time. It always starts on time, it ends on time, and you use the same agenda. And the agenda is very specific and structured in a very purposeful way. And I'll walk you through what that agenda looks like.
So for those who are saying, like, you're in meeting hell, you're in meetings all day long, you wish meetings had any value, all this, like, please pay attention to what Monica's about to tell you.
Yes, absolutely. It's and this is, we talk about this at the leadership team level, but a lot of times it gets pushed down into the organization as well. So different departments and functions have their own level 10 meeting. It might not be 90 minutes for all of those functions. So, don't get too hung up on that. But as a leadership team, it's important that they're spending that 90 minutes. And when you calculate 90 minutes once a week over the course of the year, and you think about how much time you're spending as a leadership team together, it's really not that much time. So valuable. So I'll run through it 2 times for you here. So first, we start the meeting with good news, 5 minutes. And then we do a review of the scorecard, which I mentioned earlier. These are the measurables that help you keep a pulse on your business, 5 minutes. A rock review for 5 minutes. And then customer employee headlines. Is everybody good? Is there any news we need to hear or know about related to our customers and our employees? Mm-hmm. We do reporting only here. So this is the big part where the discipline is important, because this is exactly where meetings typically go wrong.
Yeah.
So you go into your scorecard, you get hung up on that very first metric or that first page, that first slide, and then you never get to the other stuff. And then you feel like, okay, now we've got to schedule a follow-up to the meeting that the time that we just wasted. Mm-hmm. And nobody will ever say that it was actually wasted, but when you look at it in the big scheme of things, of all the things you needed to cover, you may not have prioritized that discussion over the other things. So that's reporting only. And then you review your to-do list. This is where you start to drive team accountability. Okay, last week, Shannon, you said you were going to do X. Was it done? You say, yep, it's done, or it's not done. Yeah. And you don't discuss it. You just say, is it done or not done? If it's not done, it's going to drop down to your issues list.
Sure.
And then you spend about 60 minutes of a 90-minute meeting IDSing, doing that, identify, discuss, and solve your issues. You're prioritizing now as a leadership team, what are the most important things we need to work on together as a team. Mm-hmm. And then you conclude. And we always like to say, the reason this is called a level 10 meeting is typically when we talk to entrepreneurs or leadership teams and we ask them to rate their meeting on a scale of 1 to 10, They say it's like a 4 or a 6, like we have terrible meetings.
Okay.
So this is it's driving the idea that we want to get it to a 10, right? So we're trying to get this to a level 10.
Yeah.
So at the conclusion of every meeting, we actually have, we teach our clients to rate themselves. How did we do on a scale of 1 to 10? So it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
So let me kind of walk through the psychology for you real quick on why
Good.
we do this the way we do it.
Okay.
So first of all, you're coming out of, think about everybody's in the business. This entire leadership team has been running in their function. They're in their business. This meeting, you're working on your business together, okay? So coming out of working from a mindset of working in your business to working on your business, and you're gonna do that together as a leadership team, okay? So doing good news is really just a way of making that transition from working in the business to on the business. And we ask everybody to do one piece of personal and professional good news because we are all human beings coming into this meeting together, right? So it gets us all centered in that way. Then we move into scorecard. And like I mentioned anecdotally before, that, you know, if we start to get into the details of the scorecard, we start to lose focus. So when we look at scorecard, all we do is say, each person who has a measurable says, I'm on track, my numbers are on track, or this number is off track and it's been off track for 3 weeks, drop it down to the issues list. Then you do rock review. My rocks are on track or off track. Everybody reports on we report on the company rock and then the individual rocks. On track, off track. If it's off track, we drop it down to the issues list and decide if we need to, later, if we need to talk about it. Customer and employee headlines. If there's any issues, we drop them down to the issues list. The to-do list, it's either done or it's not done. It might be, if it's not done, it just needs another week. So typically a to-do list is something that, a to-do is something that can get done within 7 to 14 days.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not done, but it's gonna get done next week. Sometimes it's not done and it's been on there for 3 weeks. You probably wanna drop it down to the issues list and figure out what's going on with that.
Yeah.
And then the IDS session is really just bringing everybody together. And as a leadership team, you have somebody running this meeting, but you're really working together as a leadership team to prioritize what's most important this week.
Yeah.
That's how you start to get traction. That's how you start to drive accountability, discipline, and focus on the right things in your organization. So that's a bit of the psychology of why it's set up this way.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So we highly recommend the level 10 meeting, but you know, having this regular meeting pulse annually, quarterly, and then weekly is really how you get to 100% strong in the traction component.
So great.
So, you know, I'll just kind of wrap up and then we can kind of, you know, if there's any questions, happy to answer those. But the EOS foundational tools that I teach are the Vision Traction Organizer, which I went through with everybody today. One of the very first things I work on with leadership teams is their accountability chart. And this idea of complexity, often when organizations are feeling like they're one of these frustrations, like we've talked about, maybe lack of control, or everything is just so complex and we can't seem to get to decision making, oftentimes it's rooted in a poor organization structure. So this accountability chart process really just helps the leadership team step out of their current roles and design a structure that is absolutely right for that organization. So we start with structure first, and then we put the people in there. And I think leadership teams just find that it's a very therapeutic way of saying, okay, I'm getting a little bit more control over my business. And then the other foundational tool is rocks, a meeting pulse, and a scorecard. So as you can see, we covered off 3 out of 5 of these foundational tools. But it takes, it's a process. It can take leadership teams up to 2 years to really get these tools ingrained in their business to the point where they feel like they're in control of their business versus their business running them. So my final thoughts are, for any organization, whether you're a small to mid-sized business or even a large organization, choose and use a system. It doesn't have to be EOS. There's several others out there, but really think about your organization as a system and make sure that you're working together as a unified team with some commonality. And I know it gets a lot harder in large, complex organizations where divisions have one system and another division has a different system. and that's a different problem. But having a system, even for those divisions, is powerful. Just that there's some mechanics for keeping each other accountable so that you all feel like you're working on the right thing.
Right.
The other thing would be just realize that if you're having a frustration in your business, it's probably because there's some weakness in one of those 6 key components of your business.
Yeah.
So really just stepping back and saying, okay, I'm super frustrated. Is it a people issue? Is my vision unclear?
Yeah.
Am I not measuring the right things? So really just kind of thinking about that and realizing that if you're frustrated, it's rooted in something as it relates to 6 components of your business. And then ultimately, it's just, you deserve to get what you want from your business, right? So many leaders and business owners have put so much into their business. They deserve to get what they want. They deserve to be in the driver's seat of their business. So, doing all of this and having a system in place ultimately helps you get more of what you want from your business. And there are lots of resources. I've got some resources on my website.
Yeah.
The EOS Worldwide site has a ton, and there's a whole traction library. So I've given you to share with the people who are on today the first chapter of Traction as a download. So you can read that. And there are other downloadable tools and videos. I've provided you, I think, the level 10 meeting video. So that's a great thing that people can kind of read and get their heads wrapped around.
Yep.
And
Basecamp as well. Some were asking about the slides and the details, but you gave us the templates that we can use.
Exactly. Yeah. And then EOS Worldwide has a tool called Basecamp. So for anybody who has their own business that maybe wants to think about implementing it themselves, it's a resource for them to go in and kind of go deeper. It's more of a paid platform where you can go deeper and get even more resources. And then there's EOS implementers like me, that basically that's what we do, is work with leadership teams to help them do that. So that's my show. But what questions do you have?
Monica, thank you. That's great. So any questions you guys have for Monica, please put it in the chat. Edwige said, excellent. Thank you for that. Yeah. And I think, when you talked about those frustrations early on, I think it was like 5 or 6 of them, you said shared the 5 frustrations, which I think no matter where you are, if you're running a huge team in a large corporation or you're in a startup mode, those are 5 frustrations that every leader faces. And for you to give us frameworks to use and where might those frustrations come from? And that last bullet point, you just said that it's inevitably one of these spokes in this wheel. So it's a good place to start to say, is it a people issue? Is it a metrics issue? Is it something around how we're handling our issues, or even like the big rocks, I think is a great one, is another word for priorities.
Absolutely.
So, because like you said, if you're a master of everything, you're a master of nothing. So really encouraging everybody to choose, pick, like even you said about choosing the methodology, right? There's lots of things you could do. Just pick one and work it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes too, when I start to share this information with people, they think this is great because this is something my team really needs. But really it's something that they need, right? So as the leader of the organization, it's really, thinking about the role that you play as well, right? That sometimes we think it's everybody else, but it's about really starting with yourself and then saying, okay, well, what investments am I making in myself? And then how can that benefit the team? And the best clients, frankly, Shannon, are people, those, business owners who are open, honest, they're willing to be vulnerable. Frankly, if you think you know it all, you still have a long road to haul, right?
That's true. Right.
Right.
No matter what
that's another important starting point. It's just kind of that self-awareness of, I don't have all the answers.
Yeah, I think that's so important. So there's a question here that, will you address issues through data the same way you address issues involving a people problem?
Yes. So I think, an issue is an issue. So it's really about getting at the heart of what the issue is. And we often say there are 3 types of issues that can come into the IDS process. There's one where you just have to share information. So it's possible that with a data issue, like, hey, we're off track for the last 3 weeks. And it's concerning, but here are the things we're doing to mitigate that risk. Okay. So that might be a way of just sharing information. Maybe somebody chimes in, everybody chimes in, nobody chimes in, but it's an issue that you have to bring to attention because it involves the entire leadership team. Whereas a people issue, you might have to discuss, it's going to be more sensitive, obviously, potentially more sensitive. So you're going to discuss that take the same exact approach, identify it at the core, and work to discuss it and then solve it together. So yeah, there's really no difference in how they come to be. There's sharing information could be an issue. There's sometimes an issue where you need to brainstorm an idea. Like, I have this problem and I need your brain power to help me solve it. And then sometimes there's an issue where there's a real problem and you need to, like, a problem with another person. I can't get this thing done because this person isn't doing what they need to do. So those get a little bit more sensitive, but you got to enter the danger as a leadership team and work to solve it together. So there are different types of issues, but they're handled in the same way.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's really a great clarifier.
Sure.
Oh, this is awesome. And you demonstrated your strength live in front of us today, which is that you take things that are really complicated and you make them tangible and simple and something that we feel empowered to go tackle. So I thank you for that. And for you to be able to synthesize all of this knowledge into a couple of minutes is really remarkable. So I hope that everybody got some, tips, some strategies, a new framework, a new resource that you could leverage to make yourself even more effective as a leader in whatever capacity that you have. So Monica, again, thank you for sharing yourself with us today.
You are very welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity, Shan.
Oh, my pleasure. All right. Be well, everybody.